Raphael Bob Waxberg's masterstroke of an animated sitcom, Bojack Horseman, is a highly revered show that tackles a wide range of personal conflict. It's done in a very real way that tends not to sensationalize the ugly parts, while also providing a hopeful future. Truly dark themes are combined with wry satire and witty humor that culminates into a pragmatic depiction of conflicted individuals navigating the intricacy that is life. What is truly impressive about this show is the manner in which it transforms from just another depiction of superficial Hollywood to one illustrating a constant struggle against mental illness. The show challenges many sitcom norms, such as simple forgiveness, the idea of a punching bag character, and having potential love interests exist outside of a man's periphery. All is done through fictitious anthropomorphic characters, yet the problems and motifs surrounding them are very much real. It's all built atop strong philosophical ideas and an austere form of serialization, which forms the basis of the show's narrative. It's this unique form of narrative that ultimately allows the show to achieve such levels of characterization. The show follows Bojack Horseman, a washed-up actor unable to detach himself from the success and legacy of his show, Horsin' Around. The non-progress of his memoir led to his publisher hiring a ghostwriter, which would go on to introduce him to Diane and reconnect him with his acquaintance, Mr. Peanut Butter. From the beginning of the show, Bojack and the individuals around him are strikingly self-aware. This represents a more greater phenomenon that persists throughout the show, that being its rejection of subtext. Subtext, a part of narrative, is the unspoken message that lies beneath the story. Oftentimes, it's used to convey a gradually increasing tension, whether it be an insecurity, relationship issue, or personal conflict. It generally results in a climax of some sort, usually at the end of a season or a story arc. This traditional form of subtext isn't necessarily present in the show. Rather, the characters will casually state their struggles, revelations, or anxieties out loud.
Can we have one conversation that isn't about you? I don't understand why you need me to like you so much.
I don't need you to like me. It would be fun if you liked me, because then I could prove to myself that my parents were wrong to never support me, because I now earn the admiration of a surrogate authority figure, thus proving I have intrinsic worth, but it's not like it's a big deal or anything, jeez.
This doesn't mean that the more tension-filled climactic scenes are missing, but it does allow, in those scenes, the characters to make very overt assertions against each other's dispositions.
Herb, I said I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I do not forgive you.
Not sure you get what's happening here. This could be the last time that
No, I'm not going to give you closure. You don't get that. You have to live with the shitty thing you did for the rest of your life. You have to know that it's never, ever going to be okay.
I really think that we'd both feel better if we
I'm
just...
dying. I'm not going to feel better. And I'm not going to be your prop so you can feel better.
While this relationship between a story and its unconscious is in part used for humor, it still serves a great purpose when it comes to characterization. This usage of self-awareness promotes acknowledging our flaws and holding each other accountable to construct meaningful change. The humor often found in these scenes serves to balance the need to acknowledge our emotions and flaws without ever embellishing or fetishizing our sadness. This relationship tends not to focus on the development of one's character, but rather the constant struggle for change. One of the most prevalent paradigms throughout the show is the contrast between Horsin' Around and Bojack's real life. Horsin' Around, like most sitcoms, is highly episodic. The constraint for episodic shows is their inability to incorporate change. The conflicts and plot points need to be neatly concluded by the end of the episode. For the formula to work and the next episode or season to be made, the setting and characters can't truly evolve. Characters making significant growth in a meaningful way would disrupt the status quo and is therefore neglected. Episodic television often falls into another trap when incorporating satire or any sort of critique. The scope being limited to only one episode can result in an effete argument. Shows may take a whole episode to make a thoughtful critique on something only to never touch on it again. For more social or political commentary, this is acceptable, but when the characters are critiquing themselves, with an emphasis on self-improvement, this becomes more problematic. Rick and Morty, for instance, shares Bojack Horseman's lack of subtext, often having characters overtly acknowledge their shortcomings. This acknowledgement may be genuine, but ultimately that's all it is, an acknowledgement, with no one around them holding them accountable, gladly returning to the status quo. By contrast, Bojack Horseman is more serialized and takes a fluid approach to narrative, one that doesn't rely on repetitive behavior for plot progression, meaning the problems arisen far back are continuous and ever relevant. The show tends to build upon the aforementioned lack of subtext, having the characters constantly re-examine their behaviors throughout the show. This allows characters like Bojack to be well-rounded and multifaceted, while also being considered unequivocally reprehensible. It allows characters to have conflicts and arcs that don't always end in resolution. In fact, it's this idea around resolution that sets the foundation for the show's narrative.
Look, the wedding was great, but that's not real life. I mean, I guess I got a happy ending, but every happy ending has the day after the happy ending, right? And the day after that. So the wedding was so much fun. It was the happiest day of my life. But, you know, what does that say about all the days I have left?
Generally, serialization is used to build up suspense and tension, culminating into a satisfying ending. But real life just doesn't work like that. Raphael Bob Waxberg recognizes this, and instead writes the characters and story arcs with no clear resolution in mind. He believes that life is not defined by endings, but rather views life as a continuum of moments in time, being either positive or negative. As Diane shows here, the characters very much reflect this sentiment. You may have the best day of your life, but what does that say about the rest of your life?
Yeah, well, what are you gonna do? Life's a bitch and then you die, right?
Sometimes. Sometimes life's a bitch and then you keep living.
This ongoing idea surrounding resolution is the basis on which the characters' internal struggles and behaviors are built off of. The show depicts time not in a linear way, but rather cyclically. This divorces the idea that characters are confined to their archetypes from the reality that characters are not perceived merely by the sum of their qualities, but rather by their actions at a certain point in time. Each character's ups and downs of personal conflict can be viewed in cycles. The negative outcomes of intended actions feed into negative behaviors that cause these actions. This leads characters into repetitive behavior based on their mentality that can only be ceased once their outlook is confronted. The story as such is ever progressing and blurs the structure of general television. This form of cyclic narrative doesn't allow for resolution in the traditional sense, which is something the characters must come to terms with. Those depicted in the show try and apply an idealized form of narrative to their lives. The worst offenders of this are perhaps Bojack and Mr. Peanut Butter, due to their shows and the influence it has had on them. Horsing Around and its ripoff Mr. Peanut Butter's House both feature clean-cut resolutions and endings, leading Bojack and Mr. Peanut Butter to believe that this sort of resolution can be manufactured in real life.
Why can't life be like it was on Horsing Around? All our issues conveniently settled in 22 hilarious minutes.
Bojack's cycle is defined by his pursuit of various accolades and accomplishments with the intent of them finally making him happy, only to end up in a worse place than he was after realizing none of these things truly mattered. His primary reason for writing a memoir, starring as his hero in a movie, and campaigning for an Oscar is that he believes these things will allow him to instantly be happy. Similarly, he applies this logic to his relationships as well. Bojack's unwillingness to admit how important Todd is to him, and his fear of being alone, leads him to constantly be clipping Todd's wings. Upon finally having had enough, Todd confronts Bojack. Bojack believes that a genuine apology can rectify his toxic behavior, but never is it so simple.
Todd, I'm sorry, all right? I screwed up. I know I screwed up. I don't know
great.
why.
Of course. Here it comes. You can't keep doing this. You can't keep doing shitty things and then feel bad about yourself like that makes it okay. You need to be better.
I know, and I'm sorry, okay? I was drunk, and there was all this pressure with the Oscar campaign. But now that it's over,
No, Bojack, just stop. You are all the things that are wrong with you. It's not the alcohol or the drugs or any of the shitty things that happened to you in your career or when you were a kid. It's you. All right? It's you.
Mr. Peanut Butter faces the same struggle with the women he marries. Mr. Peanut Butter believes that grand romantic gestures are the way to keep a relationship going, rather than proper communication. This leads him into relationships with young women who often are enamored by the grandiosity of his gestures. Diane, for instance, was initially beguiled by the idea of Mr. Peanut Butter stealing the D from Hollywood as an act of romance. However, as these women eventually mature and as more problems arise, Mr. Peanut Butter continually resorts to his grand gestures, yet to different results.
Why would you think I would like this?
Because you told me this is what you've always dreamed of?
I don't like big gestures like this. How many times have I...
but this is...
This was a fantasy. Something that belonged to me. Why couldn't you have asked me?
I'm sorry I ever try to surprise you or do nice things.
In his mind, the extravagant gestures done with pure intentions should absolve him for not listening to her needs, because the action was done out of unadulterated sincerity. Mr. Peanut Butter treats life as a rom-com, in which ostentatious behavior is normal.
I got into this business because I love stories. They comfort us, they inspire us, they create a context for how we experience the world. But also you have to be careful, because if you spend a lot of time with stories, you start to believe that life is just stories, and it's not. Life is life.
It's only once they truly understand this that the characters can work towards breaking their cycles. But achieving any sort of redemption or veneration is not so simple. Some characters, such as Diane, are able to break their cycles and see themselves in a better place. Diane's cycle revolves around her internal struggle with the need to be doing important work. She constantly found herself doing trivial work in a superficial society, yet always made the most out of it. While working as a social media manager, she's able to destigmatize abortion. While writing for a tabloid, she's able to inadvertently enact gun control. Despite all this, Diane is convinced that her important work should come in the form of an intelligent, thoughtful book of essays. This boils down to the notion of rationalizing one's trauma. The idea that all the pain and trauma suffered should amount to something tangible.
So, don't write your book of essays.
I have to.
Why?
Because if I don't, that means that all the damage I got isn't good damage. It's just damage. I have gotten nothing out of it, and all those years I was miserable was for nothing. I could have been happy this whole time, and written books about girl detectives, and been cheerful and popular, and had good parents. Is that what you're saying? What was it all for?
Once Diane accepts that one is not defined by their trauma or sadness, she's able to see the importance in writing children's books. This leads her to being able to properly medicate herself and enter into a healthy relationship. Bojack, being the one to commit the most reprehensible actions, struggles the most with absolution, because at this point, it's no longer an option. From rekindling his relationship with his half-sister, to choking out his co-star in a pill-induced delusion. From going to therapy and finding a job that gives him solace, to dodging reporters about Sarah's death, any amount of progress is countered by the persisting effects of his former actions. Nothing he can do at this point would warrant forgiveness. This embodies the ultimate strength this form of narrative provides, that being its ability to center around a deeply flawed, multidimensional protagonist, while never idolizing or rationalizing his terrible behavior. Bojack may be funny, or sometimes relatable, but never someone you'd want to be. Even for those who consume the show and still do not understand this concept, the writers dedicated more or less an entire season on Bojack falling into this trap.
And the most amazing thing about this show is that I'm sure we all have Filberts in our lives. Or we are Filberts. You know, We've all done terrible things that we deeply regret. I've done so many unforgivable things. And I think that that's what this show says, is that we're all terrible, so therefore we're all okay.
What?
And I think that's a really powerful message.
Okay, well, without further ado, the first chapter, and notice I said chapter, not episode, because I think of this show as more of a novel than a TV show. Of Filbert.
Nothing's lonelier than a party.
Barf me a river.
How you doing? Hey, you came.
Flip, I screwed up. I didn't know it would feel like that, to be in that room, to hear people cheering for Filbert.
What are you talking about?
When I first started on this job, I wanted to make Filbert more well-rounded so the audience could relate to him better.
And now you're upset because I didn't mention you in my introduction. Diane, the whole point of television is it's a collaborative medium where one person gets all the credit.
No, it's not about that. I made him more vulnerable, and that made him more likable, which makes for a better TV show. But if Filbert is just a way to help dumb assholes rationalize their own awful behavior, well, I'm sorry, but we can't put this out there.
It's out there. The whole season's dropping at midnight all over the world.
I can't be here.
The heavily destructive and toxic behaviors of the characters popular culture deems to be cool aren't for us to rationalize with. This being clear to Bojack raises one final question. How is someone that has committed the most reprehensible of actions supposed to continue existing? Redemption is out of the question. As Bojack's bender with Sarah Lynn showed, any reconciliation or apology, no matter how sincere, is more about the perpetrator's peace of mind than anything. All he can do really at this point is not be a shitty person. The show ends as the philosophy allows for. Not with the near-death experience, but the aftermath of such. Bojack doesn't die. He doesn't get the reprieve that would come with it. Instead, Bojack goes to jail, being let out for a single night to attend Princess Carolyn's wedding. The truths and outlooks on life that Bojack holds are largely derived from the shows he acts in, from believing that resolution or redemption can be manufactured through significant acts of sincerity, much like in the episodic Horsing Around, or using the deeply flawed, well-written Filbert to rationalize his own condemnable actions. The show subverts one of Hollywood's most frustrating tropes, the idea that a malicious character can die and be forgiven of their actions. This trope exists to humanize or empathize with the one committing reprehensible actions, doing an ultimate disservice to those affected by said actions. The way the show manages each character's introspections over the underlying idea that life has no endings allows for refreshing character development. All of the themes depicted throughout the show are pure. The alcoholism and mental illness is never embellished or sensationalized in any way, resulting in a truly wholesome show. Ultimately, the use of overtly self-conscious characters and a strong philosophical base construct a narrative that conveys the heartwarming idea of being able to break one's cycles without omitting the harsh reality that is dealing with the consequences of our past actions.